Let's take a look at some information and charts on Solana for Brave New Coin. So my general knowledge of Solana is limited to whatever the VCs on Twitter tell me for the most part. But it is a proof of stake chain that is trying to compete with ETH. At least that's how it looks to me. Lots of hype around Solana for sure. A new network backed by the good folks at FTX as well. So there's lots of interesting development, I guess you could say. I still think it's in the earlier stages, in the incubator stages, trying to just copy and improve on things that are happening in ETH DeFi land or just generally, right? Like they're kind of just reinventing the wheel. We've seen proof of stake networks come and go. We've seen EOS, we've seen waves, we've seen projects kind of limp along. Solana.beach is where I'm going to be getting most of the on-chain info, but they have very quick block times, a significant TPS, transactions per second, 501 million total circulating supply, 501 million total supply. Half of that is circulating, 75% of the 501 million is being staked. So not a lot to do with Solana other than stake and spec for the most part that I can see. We can look at the validators mainly for centralization, decentralization purposes. They list here that the cumulative stake can halt the network. These top 18 can do so. So they're encouraging people to delegate with other validators. Each validator will have its own commission, much like EOS or Tezos, right? Like I can't necessarily point to the differences between any of these networks independently. They don't necessarily have an identity for me in my mind, because they're all proof of stake networks with varying fees for staking, baking, whatever you want to call it, varying levels of China centralization, Asian interest, general issues with the foundations behind them. You know, these are all things to consider, I guess, right? But for me, they're all kind of extremely similar. And if we look at the staking reward after inflation, it comes to around 1%, unless you're running a validator when it's a little above 1.5%. So again, I just like to compare this to putting a stable coin in some lending and borrowing program on DeFi where you're getting at least 2%, if not higher, in bull markets. DAI, for some reason, was at 20% APY a couple days ago. So to me, it's just better to throw something in Yearn, to throw something in Comp, Aave, Maker, whatever it is. Just throw it somewhere else, right? If I have a bunch of money, if I have a bunch of capital, unless I'm extremely bullish on Solana, you know, much like Dash, right? Masternodes, all that sort of stuff. Unless you're super bullish on the future for this stuff, staking just doesn't make sense. If you don't want to expose yourself to the volatility risk, you can just effectively get interest on stablecoins, right? So I don't think this is enough these days because there's so much competition and incentives elsewhere to do other things, you know? Like why bother fooling around with Solana? Unless you want to, unless you're a hobbyist, right? Bullish Solana, whatever. I think most people in general just aren't going to bother. You know, they're just going to go elsewhere. Here's another breakdown of circulating, non-circulating. Looks like they have some burning component. Again, not really sure. Deactivating. I should look into this. I should know more, but I just don't. So it is what it is. To me, the important stuff is what is circulating, what isn't, and how much of that is being staked, because all of those supply metrics will influence price. They also have tokens on Solana, much like they do on Ethereum, and they have a growing number of DEXs, much like they do on Ethereum. So we'll take a look at some of those. DeFi Llama is one of the few sites that has Solana info, and total value locked at 1.4 billion. If you look at ETH, it's 10x that, I think, right? It's around 150 billion. Okay, 89 billion, way off. Nevertheless, as far as Ethereum dominance in the DeFi space, still significantly holds that. And they've been around a lot longer. That makes sense. A lot more projects with substantial impact on Ethereum than Solana, but you can't look at any of these and not compare them to each other. That's just how this works. Even compared to BSC, Binance Chain, Solana has some catching up to do. So from here, you can look at individual dApps. You can look at the DeFi protocols themselves. We can look at the markets, the volumes in those markets, right? All this is kind of low relative to ETH, relative to everybody else. Again, it's early days. I think if you are looking for interesting ARB opportunities or want to spend the time to dig into this stuff, it could be worth it. But again, it's super early days for Serum. And to me, it's just easier to interact with stuff that's already multi-chain sort of indirectly than digging into Radium and Serum and all this other stuff. So here's Serum. They have a DEX, right? Much like all the other DEXs. Here's Radium, TVL, Volume. The dream would be to include all this stuff into one website, much like DeFi Llama does, where I can see volumes on all the DEXs at once across everything. It's much easier to see, okay, there's stuff moving here, there's stuff not moving there. Right now, it's just sort of looking at it, this is what it is. The volume's lower than everybody else for the most part, right? And it's just too early. But as far as the UI is concerned, it looks like everything else as it should. No real reason to change any of that. The trading side of things looks much like every other platform, which is good. Again, no real reason to reinvent the wheel. So they have the beginnings, the trappings of some sort of increasingly vibrant swap market. I think it'll be interesting if DeFi regs come down for the Ethereum stuff and how that affects Solana, Avalanche, BSC, right? How it affects all of these DeFi focused chains, the DEXs on them, how permission pools take into effect. But ultimately, it's too early to really think about, for me, where all this stuff's going to go. Solana on Google Trends apparently is a word that people look for some reason. I don't know what the reference is here, but there's a baseline over around 30 for interest. That spiked with crypto stuff in February, March, May area. And that's waning again slightly. So if you're bullish, you definitely want to see this start to pick up once again, if you're bullish on Solana. Moving to technicals, they're kind of pretty clean in general. Again, not a ton of trading history on Solana, but it's held a bullish 5200 cross. It has held the 50% breakdown. It's held the mean reversion. It looks like every other altcoin chart here. Again, it doesn't really have its own identity per se, in that it has this inverted head and shoulders quality to it. It looks like all the other DeFi charts, honestly. So what you're going to want to see here when this breaks up, which it should, is a spike in volume on Binance or FTX, wherever you might trade it. At this point, this really shouldn't break down. It has trend metrics on its side. It has pivots on its side. It has pattern resolution on its side. So this looks pretty strong for bullish continuation. It's even got a pending bullish Kumo breakout on its side. Now, not all of these are going to lead to a 10x, a 15x, but you should treat every single Kumo breakout as though it could potentially give you a 2x, a 5x, a 10x, right? So it's definitely looking increasingly longable with the inverted head and shoulders playing out with a Kumo breakout. The chart looks very good, regardless of what fundamentals are saying, regardless of what VC interest is giving me a sour taste on things like Solana. 12 hour, it's already had its breakout, right? So if you're trading this on lower time frames, it looks very good for bullish continuation here. Kind of one of the reasons why I'm even talking about it today. Looks very good on the tech. On Solana BTC, it had this entire kind of 6-month RSI waxing and waning period. And you see this on kind of all markets all the time. You get the initial rise up and then you establish a series of bearish divergences. And then it pulls back to the mean, then it makes a decision. Is this going to be completely bearish, or is it going to attempt some sort of reversal? Again, it had this falling wedge quality. The square chart actually looks very similar to this, where it was at risk for a reversal, had a diamond top, had a head and shoulders, had all sorts of stuff that looked bearish, very much like here, right? This thing kept going, whereas this looks like it's very much going to reverse and actually outperform BTC in the near term. Trend metrics still bullish here. Not a lot of volume on the downside if this does break down, but overall this looks fine for bullish continuation. Looks like it's restarting again against BTC. Against ETH, it's a different story. It's mainly just sideways doldrums. Doesn't look as bearish as it did again in August to October, where it had this head and shoulders quality, broke through the cloud, broke through the 50, broke through the 200. Right now it's more neutral to bearish, but definitely not as bullish as the USD pair, not as bullish as the BTC pair. It's overall super early days for Solana. lots of building things happening, lots of comparisons to ETH, lots of attempts to say Solana is better than ETH killer, that sort of thing. Time will tell. We'll see. We'll see what happens when ETH goes proof of stake. I think it's fun to look at these other coins, these other chains, and see what they're doing, seeing if there's anything interesting going on. Fees are probably significantly lower on Solana relative to ETH, so that's definitely one thing to keep track of. And technicals on the USD pair look great, BTC pair looks great, and the ETH pair looks bearish to neutral. Lastly, I'll just mention the ETH-BTC fund and DeFi portfolio I trade for Techemy Capital on Enzyme.finance, non-custodial portfolio management tool where you can send ETH to USDC or just watch what I'm doing. You can see AUM performance allocation, all the trades I make, when and where. The dream for me as a trader is to trade through Solana, trade through wherever, Avalanche, BSC, whatever's the easiest, cheapest way, quickest, non-front running, non-dark forest way to trade is ideal. So eventually, hopefully, either ETH cleans up everything and is perfect and amazing, or we have multiple competing chains where the stuff gets routed through all these dexes. It doesn't matter if it's ETH, doesn't matter if it's Avalanche, doesn't matter if it's Solana. That's the dream for something like Enzyme, at least in my opinion. That may be difficult to implement, but that's where I'd want to be if I was them. So that's all I have for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.